Pearl Harbor Day in 1941, I was a couple of months shy of being 15 years old. It was one of those days in December that was really warm, a nice day. Temperature got up around 65. A couple of my buddies showed up and we drug our bicycles out and went off for a ride. We were going, I don't know, a couple hours. And when we got back home and I put my bike away and went in the house, my dad, mother, one of the neighbors were all bent over the radio. And my dad was very upset, angry. My mother was crying because she already had brothers that were in the service at the time. And I said, well, what's going on? And Dad said, well, the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor. And of course, then we all started listening again, and the commentary went on and on and on. And of course, by that time it was getting dark here, so we kind of settled down and went to bed. Of course, the neighbors were all in and out of each other's houses, and the topic of conversation was Pearl Harbor. Of course, as a 15-year-old's reaction, I said, we'll go get those nip suckers or things to that effect. It upset me, it upset everyone. What it did, it made us really a whole country, because in the next few weeks, why, everybody was involved in something. They set up a civilian defense corps, and due to my age, I could only be what they called a messenger, just a runner, if you will. And of course, this was long before the day of cell phones and instant communications like we have now. And almost immediately, it seemed like it wasn't a matter of days or weeks, the rationing went into effect. There was no new automobiles, you couldn't buy tires. Food was rationed immediately, sugar, coffee, cigarettes, booze. I don't know whether it was a design thing or whether it was really necessary, because they made sure everybody got affected. Everybody knew this country was at war. Of course, I wanted to go right away, as any boy my age would have, and I started lobbying my dad. Hey, when I'm 17, will you sign the papers for me? Of course, the age of consent back then was 21. You weren't your own person at 18. And he said, absolutely not. He was a great believer in education. He said, you show me a high school diploma, you can do whatever you want to. So that was settled. And but as I say, all during the war, it was a marvelous thing to see the way the country mobilized. And once the industrial complex, if you want to, got into motion, it was almost unbelievable the amount of material that they were producing.
So did you finish high school then?
Yeah,
and then
absolutely. It wasn't negotiable. The boss had spoken, but yeah, I graduated high school in 1945, and I immediately went to Enlist was early in June. And I had been an indifferent student, kind of, and there was a little doubt that whether or not my credits were going to be enough. As it turned out, they were. And I had already gone, and my dad picked up my diploma for me. But as Tom can probably testify, the military does a lot of things that defy reason and logic and so on and so forth. And there for about 2 weeks, we were running back, and they were running us new recruits back and forth between Huntington and Fairmont, because that was the big center at that time. And battery of tests. Apparently I showed a good mechanical aptitude. Of course I got it honest, I guess. But I took, seemed like tests forever, and they sent us back home. And no more than a couple of days till we were on a train again back to Huntington, taking more tests. And
why did you decide to enlist in the Navy?
I always wanted to be a sailor.
There you
I
go.
always wanted to be a sailor, and I still do. That's, it's just something you never get over, or I didn't. And so finally, of course, let's back up a little bit. In April, President Roosevelt died, and he was, to some of us, the only president we'd ever known. We'd never known any other president in our, we didn't actually get to be aware of these kinds of things. And the war in Europe wasn't over until May of that year, so he never ever got a chance to see that. And he was quite a revered person and hated justly or unjustly by a lot of people also. So at this point, we were clearly winning the war. We hadn't won it yet. It was going to be a matter of how long was it going to be, how much was it going to cost us, how many lives, how much more material, all that sort of thing. So finally, they got around and sent us poor skinheads off to boot camp. And it seemed like about every week there was about 15 of us that were sent topside, or what they called the administrative area of the Camp Perry, Virginia. More tests. Of course, unbeknownst to us, the Navy was bringing on a new class of destroyers. Destroyers were really an integral part of the fleet. They did everything and anything. They had one shortcoming. They had what they called short legs. Range was not good. Put them in a hurry-up battle type situation, and in about 3 days they needed fuel. They needed to find a tanker or go to your carrier and get some fuel. This new destroyer type was designed and built so that it could carry 50,000 gallons of additional fuel oil, which let it stay on scene for 5 days rather than the 3, which was a huge advantage. And they were also thinking about the vast distances that you have to deal with in the Pacific. So they decided finally that we were going to go to school on the propulsion system on these new destroyers. Finally, back and forth, and then early August that year, they decided we had enough boot camp and gave us a 7-day leave to come home. Well, I was at home in Fairmont, West Virginia when VJ Day happened. Of course, we were well aware that the atomic bomb was on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and knew something was going to happen. And the city was wild. It was wild, and people were just going crazy. So, my orders were, when you come back, you go to school. That's where you're headed. You're going back to school. And I went to Great Lakes for 16 weeks of what they call basic engineering. They crammed about a year's worth of engineering studies down our throat in 16 weeks. Mm-hmm. We went to school 6 days a week, got Sunday off every week, and Saturday and Sunday every third week. And it was a long grind. And it was finally over in December. And that was the first and only time of all the time I was in the service that I was ever home for Christmas. So here we are, these bright new boys ready to go, supposedly. And they sent us to what they called an OGU, or an outgoing unit. And they kind of kept us in limbo, so to speak, there for almost 2 months. Didn't know what was going on, where we were going to do, or anything like that. And all of a sudden, they showed up one evening, started calling out names. It was about the same 14 people that I'd gone through all this schooling with. Sent us off to the train and took us to the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And that's where the brand spanking new Gearing class destroyer was waiting for us. Went on board in the middle of the night. Told me we were getting underway the next day. I didn't even know where you could find a cup of coffee. And we did, but as it happened, we were just doing some sea trials and tests. We still had the yard people were still on board with us. And then for the rest of that year, they had us doing everything with that new ship that you could probably they could ever conceive of asking a destroyer to do. We went to the tropics, went to Gitmo, spent about 4 weeks down there going through some real intensive type of training stuff, and came back to New York. They assigned us to plane guard the Franklin D. Roosevelt, as a matter of fact, as a new aircraft carrier. And normally an aircraft carrier doesn't go to sea without at least a squadron or 4 destroyers with them. One for the ASW and a couple for the screen, and the other guys, the bird dog, or the plane guard as they call them. If in case a pilot misses and splashes, it was up to us to pick him up. And we got to do that a lot, that little exercise, because the Navy at that time was trying to incorporate their new jets onto the aircraft carriers, and those jet engines at that time had a real nasty habit of flaming out if it went full throttle with them. We got to pick up about 3 pilots that particular day, and they sent the rest of the squadron on back to the air station at Norfolk. We did that, and then December came along, and they decided they had to know how, they wanted to know how these new tin cans would function in cold weather. So they sent us on an operation, I think they called it Operation Chilblains. We were up inside the Arctic Circle for about 3 weeks. And matter of fact, I wrote a story for the Tin Can Sailors newspaper about that little adventure. And they had the Missouri, the battleship was with us, and a cruiser, the Little Rock. And we fared through that a lot better than the two bigger ships did. But there was a lot that went on there, too lengthy to talk about now. But there, I say I do have a story there about it. One thing that never ever made the newspapers, one of the guns that they were test firing on the cruiser had a hang fire, and when they were training it around, it fired, and the star shell hit the Missouri in the officer's country, killed a couple of people, but then of course there was never anything said about that. And then we came back and out of that and went to Argentia, Newfoundland for fuel. On the way in there, the buoy that had got kicked out of position hit one of our propellers and bent it. So that necessitated a yard period when we got back to New York to change the propeller. But those guys off the cruiser, when we were in the beer hall, would come over and say, "I want to touch you." I've never seen such lucky people as you guys are. Said, you were going down in the wave trough so deep that all we could see was the top of your radar mast. And they said you were rolling over so bad that we could see the injection scoops, which are an opening in the bottom of the ship where water goes in to cool the condensers. And so after we got back to New York, they put all the life rafts and the rigging and the canvas covers and all that stuff that the storms had torn off. That's when the first time they sent us to the Pacific. And so we went down, went through the Panama Canal, which was quite an experience. And I got to do that 2 more times, by the way, before it was all over with. And went to up to San Francisco, and they had a few modifications that they figured out between the time we were doing all this testing and so on and so forth. And sent us to the Navy Yard there for about a month to do those, and then we went on toward Pearl Harbor. That was the first time I actually saw what happened at Pearl Harbor, because it was still very evident. We came into the channel, and of course when we passed Battleship Row, the Arizona was still just a pile of rubble. It was not the nice memorial that you see now. Although they had removed a couple of our main battery, and then they relocated them up in the hills in a bunker for defense in case the Japanese decided they wanted to invade Hawaii. Of course, when you do that, something like that, you man the rail, as they call it. Everybody that's not on duty or on watch falls in along the rail, and you pay homage or salute to your fallen buddies. And it's quite an emotional thing. The family, we went back to Hawaii in 1995, I think it was. Of course, I made it a point that we would get to Pearl Harbor and to the Arizona Memorial, and of course they had a show and so forth and so on, show and everything. And I think that probably affected me more than the first time I saw the wreck. It was, for some reason or another, I don't know why, but we did. I almost, well, I guess I did. I cried. But then from there we went to another big test from Pearl Harbor to Midway to Guam to finally to Sasebo in Japan, and we, of course, that was our assignment. We were to be part of the occupation forces, and as it happened, they kind of detached us from the squadron, which was a nice thing about destroyers. You don't have to do everything everybody else does. They put you out on a lot of independent operations and so on and so forth. And we spent the majority of our time on that particular deployment in China, in the city and the port they called Tsingtao. We kind of cruised up and down the coast and sneaked in a little bit every now and then and tweaked Miles' nose every chance we got at what we could get away with. Of course, the communists at that time were really on the advance in China. They were very near to taking the country over. And we would go up pretty far north, where the hot stuff was, and we got shot at a couple of times. And we kind of brought that on ourselves, and sneak in as close as we thought we were at the 12-mile limit, and you could always see it splash maybe half a mile away or overhead. Whether that was sanctioned or not, I don't know. But knowing our skipper, he wouldn't have to have been. So, and we made 3 trips to a port in northern China. They called the Qinwing-Tao. First time we went was okay. It was pretty calm, good liberty. Got to go ashore. Second time we went, we picked up what we found out later were the embassy personnel and took them back to Tsingtao. Then the third trip we went, we picked up 18 Marines and all their equipment. And that time when we were in the harbor, we never ever secured the engines or anything. Kept the colors up at night and kept the searchlight on them. Because you could hear what sounded like thunder was actually turned out to be artillery was back in the hills. So we picked those guys up and took them back to Tsingtao. And that summer we visited Shanghai. And at that time that's something that's hard for me to think about or to talk about, is the utter disregard for human life that we could see there, where the police or the army had almost absolute life and death over civilians. And at that time, that river was considered to be the most polluted river in the world, and we had to take a lot of extra precautions while we were there against disease primarily. And like I said, I probably saw more dead people in a week that little trip than I suppose I saw the whole rest of my life. Barge loads of them. And then I wrote a story about that too. I'd say we stayed in the channel there about a week. Finally got out of there and got back out in the clean ocean, was able to get the stink off, if you will. And then in January, or close to the end of the deployment, we went back and were mostly in Japan for almost a month. And it was amazing how far along those people had gotten with their rebuilding. You know, difference between the Chinese and the Japanese is apples and oranges. Japanese are very tidy, fastidious society. People are very clean about themselves, where the Chinese mostly stunk. Well, they didn't exactly greet us with open arms, of course, but there wasn't any overt hostility either. They cooperated very well, and I think a lot of that you could attribute to MacArthur, and I think the wise way that he governed Japan for those years and finally got them on the right track. And I think it was January or February, you know, this is a long, long time ago. We were back in San Diego, and I got to be on the first leave party. And a group of us chartered an old DC-3 that almost turned out to be a mistake. I didn't think it was ever going to make it to get to Pittsburgh, where my dad picked me up. And I had a 35-day leave at that time. And of course, you know, we went back to San Diego, got to ride the train all the way across the country, which was an adventure in itself. Trains were something else. They were the way to go.
Oh, yeah.
And as soon as I got back, the ship at that time was in the yard for maintenance or overhaul. Those destroyers are really what you call high maintenance. You're always working on something. No matter how new they are, something's always broke. But they always function. And so when I reported back to the ship, and we went through the yard period. As soon as we got out, they decided that Vector, which 870 was going back to the Asiatic station. They called it then. I think they call it Westpac now. Mm-hmm. And we were about ready to get underway when they showed up and pulled about 12 or 13 of us off and sent us over to the reserve fleet. This was about in middle of 1949, I think. They decided they needed to have more destroyers in service. So they split us up and gave us a crew of helpers, mostly new recruits. And that was the first time, really, that I was able to put that extensive training and everything they put us through. They assigned each of us a crew to our specialty. Of course, mine was the main propulsion engines. And we got enough machinery in service and running on 4 different destroyers so that they could steam to the Navy Yard themselves for overhaul. I was assigned to one of them, the Blue, USS Blue, and I stayed on her till, I think it was early in the spring of 1950. And at that point, the Navy or the military went through one of those convulsions that they kind of go through every once in a while, and they had decided they had too many sailors. And of course, by that time, I was a second-class machinist mate and in what they called a critical rate. And called me up one day and said, Wilson, how'd you like to go home for a while? I said, I'd be fine. well, he said, we need to get some people off the payroll or some, whatever words they used. He said, it won't cost you any rate, won't cost you any seniority, anything like that. And he said, we can let you go home for a while, visit your parents, do whatever you want to do. And I thought, well, you know, it's been a long time since I've been home. And I thought, okay, that sounds like a good deal. And they assured me, now look, you know, it's not going to cost you anything except we aren't going to pay you. Well, that's okay. So I thought, heck, I'll go home, visit Mom and Dad, and get caught up and chase the girls. And while I was chasing the girls, I stumbled over that one, Armida. And we were both in the same high school, but we never really knew each other. She was a freshman and I was a senior. So we really hit it off right away. And and we had fun, we danced and romanced, and oh man. And I thought to myself, you know, this is the only woman I ever met that I decided I was going to marry, that I would marry. I've told her that, and she says, oh, boo, and I said, oh, no, it's true. So we kicked along there till about June, or actually it was really late May, and they must have sensed that something was going to break in Korea. So I got a letter to report, and of course, as they say, in June there sometime the North Koreans attacked South Korea, and so on and so forth. And they sent me back up to the Great Lakes again, and made sure I had a full kit, made sure, you know, being kind of inactive there for a while, I still had enough clothes and all that sort of thing. Sent me up to the Boston Navy Yard where they were refurbishing a World War II Fletcher-class destroyer, making an ASW, or anti-submarine warfare ship out of it. And we were expected to assist the yard people in getting this ship ready, which we did. It was kind of fun, and it was what we'd been trained for. It's what we knew how to do. While I was there, Armida was able to come up to Boston for a little while, and of course that was a whole other adventure too. But places we had to live in, and you know the place we lived in, and so on and so forth. But by November of 1950, we had the Conway, USS Conway, ready for sea trials, which we did. Took another quick to Gitmo and went through a little bit of training there. When we come back, they told us that we'd already been assigned even the task force number to Korea, and we were to be leaving in January. Well, I managed to get about, I think, 11 days off, and we decided we were going to get married. And between her mother and mine, somehow they threw together a heck of a wedding and a party and so on and so on. And I'd promised myself, I'd been around long enough to see what military and long separations did to families, and I promised myself that as much as I liked the Navy, if I was going to be married, I was going to be a civilian. And if I was going to be a sailor, I would be single. But anyway, we went down to Norfolk from Boston for our final outfit, stores, ammunition, all the other niceties that makes a warship function. Armida was able to come down for a couple of different weekends, and I was able to take her on board and show her where I was going to have to sleep. Yeah, but when we came up to to see the ship, we came across a tender, which was a very large vessel. And here's this 375-foot, 36-foot wide ship down below. She says, "You're going out in the ocean on that?" But so after our little weekends or so in Norfolk, why, she went back home to Mama, and we went through the canal again and went to Korea. And while we were there, we were mostly plane guarding the carriers, primarily the Oriskany. You remember, you might have seen it on the History Channel or one of the other channels there, that they sank her as a reef, as an artificial reef, a couple, 3 years ago maybe. So, but primarily we acted as plane guard for her, and this was before they were using the helicopters and everything, taking over the plane guard duties. But if you notice, when you see a carrier task force at sea, you always still see this destroyer tailing wrong behind. One out front, two on each side, and one on each side. But that was kind of fun. We had given the Russians the IFF system during World War II, which is identification, friend or foe, which every aircraft carries. And you can send a predetermined signal to it, and the pilot has no control over it. It sends a return signal. And if it's not the right one, you consider him a foe. So, of course, that MiG-15 and our F-80 resembled each other quite a lot. And we almost shot one of our own down because I guess he was a smart aleck. He had it turned off, and he didn't. Had a couple of black puffs pretty close, and he decided he let us know that he was a friend. But while we were plane guarding the Oriskany, as I say, and this destroyer was one of the old type, not very good range, about 3 days of heavy operations, and you needed fuel. And normally, if there wasn't an oiler handy, you went alongside the carrier, and they fueled you, because they could carry about 8 million gallons of fuel, as I remember. And they had a big operation going on over at that time. I don't remember the date exactly, but the Oriskany had a Marine Air Group on board that they were still flying World War II Corsairs. And while we were alongside the carrier taking on fuel, which probably had a 75-foot gap between the two ships, going right along, not slowing down or anything, everybody going about their business. And the carrier was receiving and launching aircraft at the same time, those Corsairs. And the landing deck angle on it at that time was on the side where we were fueling. If one of those guys had missed a wire or what, he'd have been right in our lap. But and the pilots weren't even getting out of the planes. They were just turning the plane around. The air crews were refueling, rearming, and they were on their way again. And that went on for about 3 days. I have to say, I don't know where that would what was going on. And during that time, they'd detach us and call us in off the shore somewhere. They'd be giving you the coordinates, and we'd be acting as floating artillery, so to speak, for the ground troops and so on and so on. And our squadron had a particular thing that we went back to about every third or fourth day. The railroad tracks ran alongside a mountain, and we'd go in there and try to cause landslides and blow the mountain down and disrupt the rail thing. And the trains got real clever. They'd hide it in the tunnels when they knew we were. So every once in a while, somebody would get lucky and catch one out, and they'd take him out. But all told, it was a pretty good, big adventure. And then come along about early August there, and they came around and called some of us up and said, "What you guys, the reason you guys got called back, put you under public law, I don't know, blah, blah, blah." Here again, Tom could tell you that the military does things that defy reason or logic or good sense, I think, sometimes. But said, "Wilson, you're going home." Okay, that's fine with me. I've been away from Armada long enough. And next time we were in port, why, they detached me, and I got on what they called the general class ships, were the military transport service at the time. And we came back to the Seattle across what they call the Great Circle Route. I think it took us 6 or 8 days. Pretty quick. Straight line's not the way to go in the ocean. You follow the curvature of the earth. Though, like I say, we got into Seattle, and I got discharged the second time, and under that thing they said I needed to be in the reserves for 2 years. Well, it's no sweat. I'm going home. And so my discharge shows that for pay purposes, I have 7 years, 11 months, and 29 days. Armada says, "How come I just don't say 8 years?" I said, "That's not the way they do it." No. So I stayed in the reserves until 1953, and then I got discharged from that, and I was done. But of course, that's just kind of some of the highlights. It's lots of little funsies in between. But Pearl Harbor made a country out of us. It really made it really gave a lot of people a lot of opportunities. And as I say, although I never ever got any combat situations in World War II, I don't regret that. Like I say, particularly during the China thing and Japan, I've seen enough dead people. And I still think about them once in a while, even after all this time. But like I say, I came home, and the power company decided I had the skills as they needed and hired me. And here I am. And here we are 66 years later, she and I, so it must have been a good decision. Anything else?
No, you were
That's great.
great.